I didn't plan to stop in front of that mural. I was on my way through the main terminal, passing crowds, luggage wheels rolling, the usual voices bouncing off glass and steel. The mural stretched across an entire wall, bold color pressed over plaster. At first glance it was cheerful bright blues, sharp reds, wide strokes. Children pointed and laughed. Tourists posed for photos. But standing close, my chest tightened. The colors didn't blend right. Shapes inside other shapes, figures bent wrong. Nothing I could name, but nothing I could dismiss either. Something beneath the paint leaned forward, asking for attention. I slipped one hand into my coat, feeling the pocket recorder's weight. I clicked it on. No reason except the unease sitting in my ribs. Through the small microphone, I caught the sound of the terminal's forced air system, the distant patter of rain on the high roof, louder now as a storm broke over Denver. But just above the mural, through vents hidden in shadow, a low hum started pressing against my ears, softer than a whisper, deeper than an engine. I moved closer, voice shaking as I narrated what I felt. Every step toward the painted wall strengthened it. At first I thought it was feedback. Maybe the recorder picking up interference from lights overhead. But I raised my eyes and saw no fluorescent tubes buzzing. Only steel grates, bolts lined in perfect sequence. The hum was not constant. It swelled and dipped, like someone slowly breathing inside the ductwork. I pressed the recorder higher, close to the painted surface. The hum filled the headphones, crawling under the traffic of voices. My pulse accelerated. The mural itself didn't move, but I felt vibration running thin through the plaster. It murmured against my palm when I leaned close enough to touch. Children still laughed a few feet away. They didn't glance at me. No one seemed to hear it. Passengers hurried past, dragging bags, yawning, checking tickets. I whispered into the microphone, describing the way the sound changed as I tilted the device. Turned slightly left, it faded. Turned back toward the mural, it grew again, louder, more exact. It wasn't a trick of my mind. My ears hissed with it. Every hair on my arm pricked. I forced myself back a step. And then the hum died, cut to nothing so sudden my own breath echoed. Only rain and engines filled the terminal again. I waited, pretending to tie my shoe, watching. 10 seconds, 20, 30, no sound. Then I leaned forward once more. Immediately, the hum surged back, trailing like a rope tightening around the skull. I staggered backward, gone, forward, present. The recording needle twitched with each shift. My mouth went dry as I realized I had mapped the edge of something invisible. A field tethered to this precise section of painted wall, activated only when approached. I rubbed my jaw and kept talking into the recorder, though every word grew tighter, more erratic. Documentation steadied me. Proof gave shape to fear. Rain lashed harder overhead. Somewhere outside, engines roared through turbulence, muted only by distance and walls. The storm carried on, but here indoors, the mural seemed to draw it inward. I placed a finger on the painted figure in front of me, an image of a child holding a plant, but beneath the acrylic surface, my skin found vibration far colder than the surrounding wall. It thrummed up through my bones. I pulled my hand back quickly, flexing fingers to chase away the tingling. The hum persisted at full rise until I dropped another 2 steps away. Then it fell slack. For a long minute, I stood there, wavering in the tide of foot traffic. Voices overlapped announcements about closing gates, lost items at security, all routine. The storm kept clawing against the roof, muted thunder striking faint echoes through glass. Nothing about the ordinary noise matched the sound woven inside my recorder. I replayed a few seconds, shoving earbuds in deeper. Beneath my own narration, the hum surged back stronger than before, as if doubling in playback. My notes recorded only 30 seconds of proximity, yet listening seemed to stretch it longer. I ripped the buds out, clutching the device in my hand. Breathing fast, I considered flagging an employee. But what exactly would I claim? That a mural sang to me through steel vents? That paint formed a channel for invisible tones? I glanced around instead. Nobody stood near enough to overhear. My voice had already given it a trace, a line of words pinned to tape like butterflies. That thought gnawed my chest. If the sound was real only when approached, then replay should have lost it, not deepened it. I could not explain why it echoed stronger in memory than it had in the air. My stomach rolled. I slipped the recorder back in my pocket and traced the mural with my eyes only. Its colors stared back, sharp and deliberate. Smiling figures bent into positions that looked both welcoming and threatening if stared at too long. Background swirls carried shapes I hadn't noticed earlier, jagged lines like fractal antennas hiding in clouds. Details I might have missed if not pressed by the hum. I coughed and steadied myself, reminding the tape silently that I was still present, still rational. But some part of me knew I no longer trusted what the wall carried beneath its paint. After another 5 minutes of drifting observation, I circled away with the crowd, pretending to lose interest. By the time I reached the end of the hall, nothing unusual stirred except the echo of rolling bags and distant storms. Yet inside my coat pocket, the recorder still buzzed faintly. I pressed fingertip to casing and felt it shake under my skin, despite the stop button pressed flat. That was when a darker thought rooted itself. Maybe the hum wasn't just in the ductwork. Maybe the mural wasn't masking it at all. Maybe the mural was the tuning mechanism. I whispered the idea to myself only once, afraid of hearing it spoken aloud. I sealed the recorder in my bag, tightened the zipper, and forced my shoulders to square. Gate calls echoed through loudspeakers, normal life carrying on without break. I moved with it, swallowed back the fear, and promised I would check the tape later, in quiet safety. But the unease lingered. The sound had chosen to appear only when I engaged the wall, only when I leaned in close, as though it waited for acknowledgement. And now, having given it mine, I was no longer sure what would follow. The baggage claim is always chaos. Travelers pressed shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the black carousel doors, waiting to spit out their luggage. Wheels thump, the belts groan, and every few seconds a bag slams onto the rolling surface hard enough to echo through the hall. It feels mechanical, simple. But as I stand closer, I notice the timing isn't smooth. The belts skip like a heartbeat under stress, surging for a moment, slowing unexpectedly, then jolting to life again with a metallic rattle. Maybe no one else cares. They're tired, they just want their bags. But I hear it. I take out the receiver from my backpack. Small, no bigger than an old cassette deck with 2 dials, a telescoping antenna, and an earphone cord already frayed at the end. I click it on, and the background hiss starts ordinary at first. Compressed audio waves of a crowded hall. But as I lower the antenna toward the conveyor frame, the static blooms. Not louder in volume, but in depth. A warped fullness creeps in, fuzz swirling in the low end of the spectrum like something alive pressing to speak. I check my levels. The movement on the meter jerks, not random, not like static. More like someone thumping at exact intervals against the casing, that my headphones tighten against my skull. Bags slam down again from the conveyor chute above, but their sound now blends with a warping undertone pulsing beneath. It stretches across the lowest bands I can hear, like metal sighing underwater. I narrate quietly to the tape, describing the pulses. Each one falls in threes, then breaks and folds into a streak of distorted vibration before settling back into rhythm. People pass behind me, their shoes squeaking, their voices bouncing with exhaustion, but I know they cannot hear this layer. It belongs only to the wires and machines or the frequencies forced through them. I step back, pretending to jot notes on a pad so no one notices the receiver. Behind me, the system shudders and groans, louder than any carousel should. The belts rattle and stall, bags backing up for a moment before sputtering forward again. When I focus into the earphones, the pulses sputter in tandem with belt motion. Not only sound, but a linked pattern tied to the mechanical operation. By now my heart is racing. I glance around, half expecting someone in a uniform to confront me, but no one notices. Then a voice cuts through without prompting. A woman in a navy smock, badge pinned awkwardly at her chest. She has a mop in one hand but isn't using it. She watches the belts with me. Without greeting, without even turning her eyes away from the system, she mutters, "Some sections are sealed. Always have been. After testing." Her tone is flat, each word chosen with care like a line memorized from training. I nod casually as if I understand, scribbling more lines on my pad that mean nothing. I ask, pretending at humor, if that's why the system keeps breaking down. Her lips twitch but never smile. "It isn't meant to break down," she answers quietly. "Just meant to stop when it needs to stop." Then she presses the mop onto the floor and turns away as if the remark never left her. I tap the recorder casing twice, testing. Each tap should create a sharp spike in my ears. Instead, it muffles instantly, swallowed, as if the recorder refuses to admit external noise while pressed against the belt. My own action muted by something already active within. I note every detail aloud. My words sound flimsy stacked against the weight crawling under. I force steadiness into my voice, announcing time and place, so later, if all fails, someone might still listen back and know I caught it here. The carousel clangs again. A metal clip from some bag has jammed, dragging harshly until torn free. The sound resonates exactly with the pulse streaming inside the static. For 3 seconds, the belts and the signal align. The harmony locks like tuning forks clashing, and a wave of nausea sweeps my gut. I stagger back a step. Passengers glance at me briefly, bored, then move on. To them, I am only another tired traveler. None see that the machines are playing in harmony with something not of passenger design. The employee re-emerges on the far side of the hall, wheeling her mop bucket, staring straight ahead. She moves carefully, like someone avoiding gaze. I wonder how much she knows, how much she's been told to repeat. Her flatness felt rehearsed, but her eyes betrayed fear. I can't shake the sense she wanted me to hear. I pick up the receiver, pretending to shut it off, then keep it in my hand while I drift deeper into the crowd. The pulse doesn't disappear. Even away from the belts, the headphones quiver faintly. Echoes cling, following as if the receiver has memorized the hum. I crank the dial for clarity, but it only distorts, deep warbling filling every space between words. I whisper more notes, throat dry, asking if the baggage system is more than transport. My pen scratches harder than I intend. The storm outside groans against the roof again, rain battering the glass panels near the upper levels. Thunder carries in, low but real. Yet under my headphones, the thunder blends right into the signal, indistinguishable, like both fall from the same hidden source. I bite my tongue to stop shaking breath. I remind myself, luggage, conveyor, machinery, testing. But no list of rational words untangles this pulse. Every second it grows clearer, the routing system hums with more purpose than moving bags. The sealed sections she mentioned won't leave my mind. What do they need to keep closed? Why not dismantle broken belts unless they're not broken at all? The notion creeps heavy into my lungs. This system is not serving passengers. It is listening. People clap when the last carousel spins empty, final bags taken. They disperse quickly toward exits. The belt slows, halts. But in my headphones, the pulse continues without break, steady in the void. The terminal empties, but the recording device will not let go of the sound. For the first time, I feel certain it is not ambient, not a byproduct of failing machines. It breathes. It persists. And as I stand alone near the quiet belts, the static lingers like a signal waiting for acknowledgement. I Have already given. The envelope arrived in the mail 3 weeks late. Stamped 3 times with forwarding marks. As though someone had kept deciding it didn't quite belong where it was going. Inside, under stiff cardboard, the maps. Paper yellowed, folded so long that the creases threatened to split. I laid them across my desk and smoothed the wrinkles with the side of my palm. Ink bled faintly blue into buried layers, heavier near the edges where legends and signatures stacked. These were supposed to be preliminary construction designs of the Denver International site, acquired through a Freedom of Information request. Preliminary, but revealing. Overhead, rain pressed against the apartment window, steady and insistent. I set my small speaker nearby, playing a loop of rain tracks I often left running during long nights at the desk. I switched on the recorder to habit now to capture my own process. The paper exhaled moth scent, heavy with storage. As I stared, lines of tunnels spread beneath terminals like veins, some heading far beyond the boundary markers. Not neat spurs, not commuter tubes. More like channels designed without care for passenger flow. Angles wrong, pushing west toward empty land. My breath hitched as I traced them with a finger dot at first. I spoke calmly to the tape measurements, notes on markings, observations about width relative to scale. But the longer I looked, the less sense the proportions made. Curves that repeated in intervals too regular, almost rhythmic. Cross points where no structures exist above. My voice slowed. The rain playing on the speaker deepened, filling space. But when I later rewound and listened back, something else had layered into that sound. Hollow knocking. 3 beats. Then silence. Then 3 again. Clear against the artificial rain, though I hadn't heard anything when I recorded it live. The realization clawed down the throat. I stopped the recording abruptly, shaking my head, pacing from desk to window. The actual rain outside hit softer, random taps against glass, never precise. Yet on the tape, those hollow knocks struck rhythm, exact. My voice cracked as I admitted it aloud, captured forever. I did not hear this at the time. The tape had stolen a sound from elsewhere and buried it over the loop I thought was harmless ambience. The admission made my fingers tremble as I pressed pause. The machine felt heavier than it was. I dug a small UV flashlight from a drawer. Practical tool. Sometimes invisible stencils or notes showed through fluorescence on these old documents. I killed the desk lamp and shined the violet beam over the map spread. At first, nothing. Then faint curling lines glimmered neon green, snake-like, converging at points already marked as sealed chambers. A design unseen on the base print, but waiting beneath. My pulse spiked. I traced one glowing route that detoured sharply, looping back and forth before linking into spirals underground. Not functional for transit. Purpose unreadable, unless the tunnels themselves were meant to create a pattern and architecture of sound. Or a geometry built for resonance. I set it into the recorder though my voice quaked. These lines are not transit lines. My throat felt pinched, exposed. The map seemed to glow differently each second, sometimes brightening when my palm drifted close as if skin conductivity sparked it faintly. I stepped back, blinking. For a moment, I thought I saw motion beneath the ink, like something fluid shifting between lines. It vanished when my eyes fixed, as though unwilling to meet me directly. I returned to the recording, pressing play again, listening to my own hesitant commentary. And there again, during pauses knocks. Always in sets of 3, patient, unhurried. Sometimes faint enough to blur under rainfall, but insistent when silence arrived. I checked the apartment walls. Knocked back. Nothing echoed. Still, when I replayed a section of tape, the 3 knocks appeared again, perfectly timed to meet my own pause, answering silence with sound. I whispered to the recorder, not sure why. Maybe to see if it would continue responding. "If you're there." I stopped the tape immediately after that, too afraid to hear what might come next. I breathed into my hands and collected myself. Notes scattered across the desk. The maps still glowed faintly, curling at corners from their age and damp in the air. Patterns sketched across them like the skeleton of something buried, no one admitting it. Symmetry too perfect for accident. I bent over again, shining ultraviolet, forcing myself to trace another spiral. My chest rose and fell sharply, breaths so shallow they rasped loud over quiet. When I touched the pivot on paper, the rain from outside softened, as though the world outside dimmed to make room for sound within. I pushed away from the desk, gripping the edge hard as blood drained from fingers. I whispered again on a fresh tape, steadying my tone as if that could impose order. Yet nothing seemed orderly about this. A map of airports should be about flow, travel, departure, and arrival. This one carried designs twisting without human need. Shapes like interlocking speakers or overlapping resonance chambers. Tunnels intended not for moving people or luggage, but for moving something else entirely unseen. The knocks remained inside the machine when I pressed play by accident. 3, pause. 3, pause. My ears started imagining them across the whole room. I coughed and laughed bitterly, a short, broken hiss. I told the tape I was shutting down for the night. Then I folded the maps carefully, slid them back into the envelope, and hid them underneath a stack of bland tax documents. But when I turned out the lamp, the memory of the fluorescent glow burned in my eyes long after. Shapes that weren't for travel. Shapes drawn to tune more than space dot and beneath it all. The risk heavier than before, that those shapes are still in use. The storm rolled heavy across the airport grounds. Thick sheets of water hammering the roof of the rental car parked crooked in the far lot. Wipers could never keep up, so I left them dead at mid-swipe, glass streaked and trembling with rivulets. I set the spectrometer on the dashboard, its screen glowing pale green against the dark. Every second it jittered, numbers snapping sharp across the lower margins, barely holding steady. Intervals spiked exactly 20 hertz apart, marching up, plateauing, then resetting to 0 as if snapping back like a rubber band released. I leaned closer and whispered notes into the built-in mic. Intervals 20 hertz apart. Ramps at uniform speed. Feels like a beat, but not natural. My throat worked dry around the words. For a moment I pressed my hand against my chest, checking the rhythm against my own pulse. They overlapped disturbingly well, cycles near 80 beats per minute, like a body's resting heart relocated into atmosphere. I looked at the rain-smeared window. Every streak running down the glass seemed pulled by that rhythm, bent toward it, as though gravity knelt to something else outside. I dialed my phone and pressed it between one ear cup and the side of my head. A low click, then my old contact's voice, strained familiar. He used to run comms out of FAA field stations, back before he quit quietly. When he heard me say I was testing near the airport during the storm, his breath stiffened. He listened in silence as I described the spikes, the measured ramps. Then his tone cut sharp. Do not circulate those numbers. Not yet. Not until you know what they mean. You don't understand what amplitude ramps can trigger. The words shook unguarded, not lecture but genuine fear. I tried pressing for details. He hesitated, then muttered, "They're not accidental. Never treat them as byproducts. They build towards something. Publishing them makes you part of it." His voice trembled. Each word struck harder than the rain against the windshield. Then the line broke clicks, muffled distortion, and silence. I sat with receiver useless in my lap, the storm filling the gaps. Through headphones, the measured pulse throbbed clearer, syncopating with the rain until the storm seemed to beat time along with it. I pulled the cassette from its slot and wound back, thumb pressing awkward on rewind. As the tape reversed, I expected chaotic roars of rain played backward, hisses of thunder melting into garbled echoes. But the playback did not carry true reversal. It sounded like the storm had been swallowed. Normal hiss vanished into a sleek stretch of blank silence, every drop erased as though clipped out of existence. Only my own faint voice notes remained, hanging strange emptiness. Silence that wasn't raw absence, but polished too clean, edged with something synthetic. My thumb froze on the key. Muscles in my wrist locked like clamps as the recognition sank in. The interference hadn't just masked weather. It had sculpted the tape itself to cut the storm away. Erased natural sound, leaving segments of nothing too smooth to occur by accident. I lifted my head and stared out through the angled glass once more. The rain hammered louder against the car roof than ever, real and present. But on tape, all evidence was clean lines of emptiness, a gap that could never convince someone a storm even happened. People say silence is natural, but never this silence. My hands shook as I rewound again, looking for any trace, the faint hiss of analog mechanics, the breathing of error across tape. Each cycle delivered the same cleaned corridor of sound. I whispered my reaction to the recorder, and my voice cracked beneath it. The interference controls what remains. Immediately, doubt groaned heavy in my chest. Not just background. A force taking decision away from the machine, stripping the world out and leaving chosen fragments. My body trembled while the cassette turned helplessly between the reels. I pressed palms against my thighs to steady myself. The spectrometer still pulsed faint green, signals ramping in measured waves, patient, certain. I imagined miles of concrete beneath my car feet away, and the hum traveling up through it like blood chasing veins. No natural storm carries precision like this. Lightning is chaos, rain is scatter, thunder roars wild. But this was shaped, segmented like it wanted to be read. My friend's voice replayed in memory, thick with fear, "Don't publish yet." His warning burrowed deep. He didn't plead with me to stay safe. He pled with me not to feed it. Thunder cracked again, and for the first time the cassette didn't acknowledge it. Silence, naked and perfect, cut in instead. Something about that felt worse than if a voice had appeared. I sat hunched, breath shallow, hand still resting on the pause key. Muscles frozen. If even the storm could be edited away while I sat inside it, then the question burned against me. How much of what I hear belongs to me? And how much belongs to the signal deciding what stays? The phone rang just past midnight, the insistent metal tone cutting through my half-sleep like a drill through glass. I thought at first it was a wrong number. Unknown ID, no message. But something in the timing, so close to the storm outside, made me answer. The voice on the other end was male, strained but steady, using a cadence like sandpaper over stone. He didn't give a name. He didn't even breathe between sentences. He simply asked where I had been recording. When I hesitated, he listed exact times. 10:47, 11:32. He knew my sessions like he'd been standing behind me. I asked who was speaking. He ignored the question. Instead, he recited sweep schedules. Precise sweep schedules down to the minute. Security clearances that hadn't been public for decades. Yet he knew which gates closed at which intervals, which surveillance feeds blinked out before restart. His tone didn't flex. No humor. No attempt at reassurance. Just facts laid one atop the other. Finally, after a long pause, he said if I wanted proof, if I wanted to see the moment the airport swallowed sound into silence, then I needed to be at gate B43 before the final sweep tonight. He repeated it once, slower, as if reading coordinates to a pilot, and then the line ended. My palms sweated against the receiver. I wrote down everything the moment silence returned. My handwriting shook so badly it bled through the paper, but the words mattered more than the mess. B43. Just before closing. Everything about his delivery felt rehearsed but desperate, like information leaked knowing it would shorten someone's life. I packed my bag recorder, notebooks, the faintly buzzing spectrometer, and left without thinking. The storm beat heavy as I crossed the parking lines, each drop a hammer against the hood, but I felt adrenaline burning hotter than the weather. He knew my recording sessions. He knew the times. I couldn't turn away now. Inside the terminal was a different world. Almost deserted, fluorescent light flattened into cold sheets along polished floors. The crowd noise of earlier was gone, replaced by faint echoes. Announcements spilled half-hearted from distant speakers, calling flights that had already left. I walked toward Gate B, dragging my oldest suitcase along to play the role of stranded passenger. Every step carried tension, like someone already watching me. By the time I reached the barren stretch of corridor near 43, the place was empty. One janitor with headphones pushed a mop across the far end, humming vaguely to a beat. He seemed desperate to stay inside. I lowered myself into the plastic seat, slumping like a traveler resigned to bad luck. I checked my watch. 11:56. I clicked on the recorder inside my bag, leaving the zipper half open. Then I waited. A long 5 minutes passed beneath monotonous buzzing light. My eyes burned from fighting fatigue. Then, without warning, faint clicking burst through the earphones resting around my neck. At first, I thought it was luggage wheels rolling across a distant surface. But when I tightened the cups against my head, the sound was sharper, defined, repeating at near regular intervals. Click, click, click. Pause, click. Click, click, click. My notepad slid onto my knee, and I began jotting times automatically. Each sequence pulsed in sets, then broke in irregular cascades. The pen tore paper with the speed of recording. Sweat dripped down my temple, though the gate air was cold. One counted 15 individual sequences in the first 2 minutes before the cadence changed, stretching longer, lower, until they almost resembled syllables slurred in digital throat. Language? My mind tripped over the possibility as distortion fuzzed between pulses. Something behind the clicks wanted to articulate, buried under static like a mouth wrapped in gauze. For each cluster, faint harmonic residue lingered, pitched high enough that it raised gooseflesh across my forearms. I steadied my breathing and whispered observations into the microphone I kept clipped beneath my collar. Click sequences interlaced with distortion. Tonal residue present. Feels deliberate. My words cracked midway, betraying the pulse of fear I couldn't hide. Across the gate, janitorial staff passed again, dragging refuse bags, pushing vacuums. None of them reacted, which meant either their ears weren't tuned to this frequency, or they had learned to ignore it long ago. I turned my head and stared at the darkened glass of the waiting area. Rain streaked down in perfect lines, mirroring the clicking patterns. I couldn't decide if it was my imagination, manufacturing synchronicity, or the airport adjusting physical rain to its signal. My pen kept moving, filling margins with tick marks for each cluster. 11 minutes into recording, the cycles shifted again. This time not clicks, but a hollow resonance woven into them, hovering like the faint exhalation of a choir pressed halfway beneath water. My stomach tightened. It wasn't external noise. The earphones carried it so close it felt internal, like bone-conducted sound bypassing ear canals. I adjusted the dial, lowering gain. The static hushed, but the pulses remained, unwavering, each bit of distortion seeming more like scrambled dialogue rather than interference. Every time I held my breath, straining to distinguish meaning, I almost caught syllables. Never enough for words, but enough to know something was being shaped. I leaned back in the plastic chair, pretending to sleep as a guard strolled by. He glanced across the row, his eyes brushing mine quickly but without pause. The kind of glance that suggests suspicion without proof. I slouched deeper, pretending to dream, even as the clicks increased in urgency. Each cluster now preceded by a faint pop, like microphone feedback too distant to register fully. By 12:32, the signal tripped into rapid energy, clicks layering so fast they blurred. My hand cramped trying to note timestamps for each. Eventually, I gave up and pressed the notebook against the recorder mic instead, letting scribbles scratch as audio markers. My pulse thundered in chest and wrists. The distortion thickened beneath the pulses until it sounded like stacked voices gargling through thick static. I whispered, "This is not output. This is intake, collection." The words frightened me the instant they left my mouth, as though speaking them aligned me to the mechanism working here. Then the phone buzzed again, startling so violently I almost dropped the receiver. The same voice as before. "Whisper now." He didn't give context, no greeting, nothing. Just one line. "They aren't broadcasting out. They're drawing in." His words trembled like they were forced through teeth clenched. Then the line died. Not silence, dead air, the kind that feels like the line isn't disconnected. Just muted deliberately so you can feel someone still at the other end. I stared down at my hands, heart pounding in throat, knuckles pale. My pen tapped without rhythm against the page. I didn't dare speak the words aloud again, not here under buzzing lights. But I left the recorder running, its reels catching every distorted cluster still unfolding, every ghost syllable sighing through static. I knew, with a clarity deeper than panic, that I had stepped inside the boundary tonight. They weren't keeping sound within. They were pulling everything downward, feeding it into grounding tunnels beneath. And my tape now carried proof of that draw, tugging not just rain, not just signal, but something closer to me with every passing cycle. The sign on the door was clear. Authorized entry only. Yellow background, black block letters, corner peeling from years of moisture. The kind of sign you know people walk past every day without noticing. But tonight, my eyes fixed on it. Rain pressed against the outer windows, and here, at the threshold of this service corridor, water leaked under the seam, pooling where no drain should be. It spread thin across the tiles and gleamed under the fluorescent wash of ceiling lights. I pressed a hand on the cold handle, paused long enough to steady my breath, then pushed. The hinges creaked softly, swallowed almost instantly by the storm's muffled breath pouring through cracks. Inside, silence. A hard kind. Not the silence of a working building at rest, but sealed, expectant. I stepped in and pulled the recorder from my bag. The moment I clicked it on, the line spiked. The built-in meter shot red, screaming without warning into near-deafening hiss. I tore one headphone from my ear, half expecting an alarm to blare around me, but the hall itself remained hushed. Only my device roared. I whispered into the mic to mark the moment. Immediate peak. No source present. My voice rattled, even softer than intended. The corridor stretched long, narrowing into decay. Walls were freshly painted, too clean to match flooring long stained by rust and leaking pipes. Overhead, the lights flickered in uneven rhythm. Not the usual strobe with failing ballast, but dimming in slow waves, as if each circuit gave power away to something else drawing current. They never burst. They only sagged, weakened, then revived. I raised the recorder, watching the meter flinch with each dip. The hiss surged, then contracted, shaping itself with the lights in complete sync. I stood there listening, chest pressed tight, knowing this wasn't random malfunction. I walked deeper, water seeping past my shoes. The hiss bent, softened to a deeper undertone. As I strained, another layer emerged beneath, a swell timed, too exact to dismiss. It pulsed in intervals, slow and regular, carrying weight similar to lungs inhaling, exhaling. The tones did not mimic words, yet their cycle was human enough that I found myself matching breath to it without meaning to. I caught myself and stopped, forcing a cough to break rhythm, horrified at the way my chest wanted to align with tones pressed into concrete. I whispered into the tape again, softer now. Swell distinct. Interval equal to breathing. The lights dimmed again, brighter this time on revival, casting sharp shadow across metal pipes running along the wall. For a second, I thought movement crossed behind me. A faint ripple in peripheral vision. My hand gripped the recorder tight like it might protect me. Then the sound. Footsteps. Sharp, hollow on concrete, trailing evenly behind me. Not quickening, not shuffling, just firm weight landing in perfect sequence. Instinct froze me in place. I didn't turn. My heart pressed against ribs, pounding louder than the hiss. Slowly, very slowly, I lifted the device closer to my ear. Through the headphones, the footsteps matched the tones exactly, the swell. The exhalation, then the echo of a step behind me. I braced myself. Head turning sharply, nothing, corridor empty. Water pooling black beneath buzzed light. No figure, the air pressed still around me. But the recorder insisted otherwise, delivering each footfall with mechanical certainty, synced to the breathing tones as though one body walked with invisible cadence by my side. My thoughts scattered and reassembled on panic. I whispered for the tape my own voice then. No visual, only trace audible. The statement gave me no comfort. I forced a step forward. Another footfall followed behind in perfect unison. Another. The distance between me and the unseen refused to grow. My body trembled with each pace. The hiss thickened until each breath I took seemed printed already in its rhythm. I moved faster. The sound behind followed perfectly, no lag, no falter. I reached the door at the far end, shoulders striking it in clumsy force. Metal groaned. I hadn't even checked if locks held. By some grace they gave under pressure, and I stumbled into brighter service lights. Safe? No, but distance loosened the grip of sound. The hiss faded to background static again. The swell evaporated. Footsteps vanished. My knees wobbled. I pressed the recorder pause button with shaking thumb and leaned hard into the wall. My skin prickled with cold sweat. The silence that met me was the silence of a building after hours, ordinary again. Yet my blood rang with memory that nothing ordinary lived in that corridor. I forced myself to breathe. Shallow, then steadier, though my mind still filled with the echo of paired steps. I replayed 20 seconds of tape there in the service wing, irrational, craving confirmation. The playback struck like ice. My footsteps alone should have sounded. Instead, each one doubled in perfect resonance. Mine then another overlaid, flawless symmetry across time. Paired breath floated within the tone bed. Listening felt like ingesting my own shadow. My grip failed. I nearly dropped the cassette deck. I pressed stop, shoved device back into the bag, and cursed myself aloud. I had promised earlier not to give fear full ground. Yet here I was, pressed trembling against the wall, afraid to stand upright. My throat burned raw from whispering. I stared at the closed door I'd escaped through. Behind it, the corridor held its rhythm, whether I listened or not. I shut my eyes tight and rehearsed a simple lie, that I had heard old pipes echo, under heavy rain, condensation, faulty circuitry. But my heart didn't accept that story. The tape would not accept it either. When my strength returned, I wiped pooling water from my shoes and started walking toward the public concourse again. My head lowered, posture a disguise of weariness. Travelers passed without noticing me. I clutched the bag at my side, weight heavier now with the proof it carried. I told myself I'd return, though every cell screamed not to. One day, with steadier pulse, with clearer plan, I'd step past that sign again. For now, the tape would have to stand. But even as I rejoined the noise of public space, I couldn't shake the sense that footsteps still followed, buried somewhere inside the playback. Waiting for me to press rewind, the motel room smelled of damp carpet and stale detergent. Rain battered the parking lot outside, pouring steady in the dark. Drops smacked the air conditioner unit under the window, turning metal into percussion. I set up the small desk with recorder, headphones, and notebook. pressing the lamp switch until yellow light hummed low over the gear. I had dragged in every piece of evidence from the airport, and now it sat here, waiting, like living weight. I told myself I would line it up systematically, cold process. Slow comparison, but already the storm outside clawed at the walls, reminding me this wasn't just data. I started with 2 tracks, the outdoor rain I had captured earlier and the static trace from the baggage belts. I sensed them by hand, lining major pulses against the heavier patter of drops. At first, the blend seemed random. Skies move without order. Interference runs its own course. Yet within minutes, the earphones convinced me otherwise. The drops and pulses began forming ratios, mathematical neatness. A drop, then 2 pulses. 3 drops, then a cluster merging inside distortion. It was too exact, too measured. Not interference hiding behind weather. The weather itself was carrying the signal whole. My stomach clenched as it settled in. Rain wasn't veil, it was vessel. I leaned closer over the cassette deck and adjusted dials. Levels climbed, blending hisses into rolling tone beds. I whispered into the mic, "The storm is antenna." Saying it aloud chilled me worse than discovery. By then, my palms were sweating. I wanted to shut it all off, but my hand refused the switch. Instead, my focus tunneled. Each ratio splayed across the headphone cups became language too vast to translate yet, unmistakably alive. I grabbed the half-broken coil of copper wire I had scavenged from home repair, taping ends into a crudely looped filter rig. Improvised, ugly, but conductive enough. I patched it in, rerouting audio through the loop before sending it to headphones. At once, undertones formed deeper structure. Faint resonance cut through, voices carried in watery reverb. Choral, collective, as if 50 mouths hummed the same note through long pipes. At first, soft, buried in illusion maybe. And then, within seconds, growing distinct. The resonance swelled until my chest buzzed with it. I straightened in the chair, body braced, hand gripping edge of desk. The tones weren't random. They climbed like intention, building slow. I checked notebook margins in reflex, marking time. Every half minute, new layers folding over the last, harmonics expanding. 3 minutes of this uprising, voices mounting until room itself vibrated. The lamp trembled. The metal frame of the bed rattled a thin high note. My throat felt tight, temperature climbing fast. Skin flushed as if fever had ignited. I pulled the mercury thermometer I kept for calibration, slid it under tongue, continuing to record. 99, climbing to 100.3 in under 60 seconds. I circled the numbers in my notes. Heavy ink pressed so hard it bit paper. Not subjective, not imagined proof that external sound was making physical change in my body. My skin tingled, sweat running cold down my back. The voices reached a choral peak, layers perfect, pressing inside as though my ribs had become their chamber. I gasped late, head bent forward. And then all at once, they collapsed. The whole swell cut short, decaying in flat seconds into absolute silence. No fade, no tail. Cut like a wire pulled. My ears rang hollow in the vacuum left behind. For half a breath, the silence comforted. But then fear stormed back in. Because silence this neat doesn't belong. Anyone who's rewound tape knows analog hiss. Any room holds air hum, building creaks, faint neighbor coughs. Here, there was nothing. The storm outside still beat against the motel lot, but through the filter, it ceased to exist. The system denied its presence. It was as though sound no longer traveled the medium, not until those voices would choose to return. I whispered into the mic, my own voice trembling as though speaking across thin ice. External signal produced measurable shift in core temperature. 3 minutes duration. Terminated without fade. My throat cracked, words sticking against dryness. I pushed hair back from forehead, realized skin still burned unnaturally warm, though sweat chilled elsewhere. My pen scratched notes automatically, but the circles I drew around the thermometer reading kept widening, ink bleeding into the page as I pressed harder than paper was meant to take. The question kept beating inside my skull. If sound can alter temp inside my body, what else can it reach? Pressure, memory, blood? Each thought arrived faster, narrowing into terror at how permeable I truly was. Years knowing sound passes through skin, but never believing an agency behind it. Now the earphones hissed faintly on desk, residue not gone, whispering like it still tested me. That residue belonged less to weather and more to something reaching through carrier, waves to measure me back. I tried to steady my voice, but every word on tape cracked. Storm itself is no mask. It is conduit. What else passes between? My chest ached, the ribs pulling, as if they no longer trusted my lungs with the task. I yanked cords free, tearing the copper loop loose, wires sparking faint as they bent. Choral resonance vanished back into storm. The real rain poured steady at window again, while the motel fluorescence flickered once above me. I sat frozen, palms flat against desk, waiting for rhythm to return. Waiting for proof I still breathed independent of it. The thermometer rolled in circles near my elbow, mercury trembling up and back like it knew something I hadn't admitted yet. I swallowed hard and forced words again, softer. If voices move through rainfall and rainfall carries through me, then openness has no edge. Silence answered, broken only by water hammering glass and neon sputter outside. My body shook without decision, asking how much of me was already inside the recording. The diner was nearly empty that morning, the rain outside still tapering from the night storm. Grease clung to the air, eggs frying somewhere in the back. I sat across from my FSA contact, coffee cooling in front of him, lines under his eyes deeper than usual. For a while, he avoided speaking, shifting his spoon around the rim of the mug as though the sound itself might buy him time. When he finally met my stare, his voice cracked into a confession that seemed pulled from him unwilling. Early tests, he said. They knew about anomalies in passenger reports after storms. His words came slow, measured, like peeling a scab. Auditory afterimages, he called them. People left the airport and weeks later insisted they still heard muffled voices when alone. Not loud, not enough to send them to doctors, but subtle, repeating, phrases they couldn't place. Some claimed it was their own names, others unfamiliar languages, always arriving in quiet gaps. He said logs existed. I leaned forward. He didn't deny it. With hands reluctant, he slid a worn leather book from his bag, placing it against grainy tabletop as if it burned. The logbook was old, heavy in my palms. Yellowed pages showed neat columns of handwriting, interrupted every few leaves by thick black strokes. Names struck out, notes covered. Only bleeding shadow remained beneath. My pulse picked up. He kept his gaze on his coffee, refusing eye contact. I flipped pages slowly until my sweating fingers smeared ink. Observations about post-storm delay effects, scrawled in faint pencil. Passengers walking corridors alone, repeating whispered samples, dismissed as fatigue. Each note ended in the same block stamp, controlled, followed by blackout bars. I asked why so much redaction. He said the arguments went nowhere. Better buried. I asked to keep the book. He tensed, shaking his head. But then, perhaps tired of carrying weight he no longer wished for, he allowed a compromise. 10 minutes in the back of the diner's copy machine. Quick, quiet. I hurried through it, each page flattened under heavy lid, machine hissing, spitting faintly curled sheets. Behind me, he kept watch near the counter, hand stringing the handle of his mug until knuckles paled. I finished, slid pages back hurriedly, and handed the book across before thanking him. He didn't answer, only closed it like burying a body, shoved it back into his bag and left. That night, alone in the motel room, I spread copies across the bed. My recorder sat open on the desk nearby. I tried editing tapes from the last corridor sweep, syncing intervals to footnotes I had circled in the log. The air outside was quiet. Rainwater still dripped from motel awnings, but the storm had passed long ago. Yet as headphones tightened across my head, faint whispers seeped from reels. At first I thought them interference, overlapped voices from the previous night. But then the chill arrived, because the voice was mine. The phrasing exact, yet repeating seconds before I actually spoke. I sat rigid, pen frozen mid-stroke. My narration doubled. Playback delivered my words before my throat had carried them. It was not echo, not delay. It was prelude. Line by line, I began hearing myself announce observations just ahead of what memory swore I had recorded. Each one staggered by 2 breaths, always just in front, like ghost tracks cued early. I whispered fast into the mic, trying to test. My voice admitted the test in real time. Then, 2 seconds later, the tape played the same admission, my tone thinner, already drawn. The nausea of being predicted hollowed me. I slammed the stop button down hard. The cassette reels groaned, slowed. But they did not stop where commanded. They carried on, dragging magnetic tape smooth through heads as if indifferent. My recorded voice ended, but the machine kept unwinding. What followed made my lungs seize. My breath, inhale, exhale twice. Clear through speakers though, in the room I had gone dead silent, frozen at the desk. I yanked cord free of the headphone jack and the silence crashed heavy. But still my chest heaved from the playback, convinced that a second version of me lingered, breathing past my control. I didn't switch off the machine again that night. I left it open, but silent as proof of what had occurred. My ribs shuddered every time I remembered those extra breaths. Sweat clung slick under my arms, my skin refusing cool. I flipped through copies on the bed, eyes burning lines into faint pencil words until they blurred. Again and again, I circled a phrase tucked in margins, auditory afterimages. Beside it, in heavy pen, the description, Phantom Self. The maps sprawled across the desk like arteries opened on paper. Photocopied sheets still curled at the corners from too much heat against the copier glass. I taped them edge to edge until Denver spread in fragile patchwork, an underground skeleton superimposed across the city. Rain tapped gently against the motel window as if coaxing progress, reminding me it had always been the storm carrying the alignment through. I placed pins at tunnel entries marked earlier, then laid transparent tracings of waveform peaks from my recorder on top. The alignment made my hands shake. Each recorded hum from separate nights tied directly to mapped storm drains, radiating outward. Not random, not scattered. Structured in circles, repeating at intervals so clean, I whispered disbelief into the room. The pins connected not as infrastructure, but as arcs, forming concentric bands. Each hum mapped perfectly to points I hadn't noticed, until overlays forced them into cohesion. I took a deep breath and forced myself to whisper into the tape. Coordinates line up. Circular symmetry. Intervals exactly repeated. My pen scrawled across the margin at speed, arrowing vibrating points into interconnected design. The realization swept heavy. Tunnels never meant just for passenger flow. These were sound chambers, resonance tubes waiting below city foundations. I called a friend, a voice I trusted, a professional ear. An acoustics researcher, someone who had measured cathedrals, amphitheaters, parks where echoes behave like manipulated physics. Her voice turned curious when I told her the patterns. I sent photos, sketches of the layout across my desk. She stayed quiet for a long time, then spoke with strange hesitation. It's not drainage. The shape's resonant. Like a cavity meant to amplify. Like a mouth, really. She half laughed, then tried to retract the weight in words. But even a joke left resonant terror in me. I replayed the tape from the earlier night, the one with my voice doubled. announcing observations seconds in advance. I slowed the playback deliberately, dragging draw out longer than natural. Beneath the words, low pulses breathed. Paused reels captured intervals swollen wide. Tick marks at spacing intervals measured along the hum formed the same arcs pinned across storm drains on the blueprint overlay. Perfect match to spacing found in tunnels. My double voice hadn't just predicted words. It carried rhythm of structures underneath, printed onto magnetic strips like blueprint voice. I leaned over the desk, arms stiff against wood, whispering everything into mic. My tone cracked uneven, but I forced record regardless. The echo is not accident. The tape carries spacing identical to map tunnel arcs. Audio and architecture mirrored. Resonance interacts between them. My breath stuttered in thin sheets of air, throat bone dry. I scribbled notes across my copies until paper nearly tore. Even slowed playback made my ribcage swell instinctively, as if body recognized intervals more ancient than words themselves. The storm outside spiked again, drops smearing across glass. My copper loop, still bent from earlier experiment, hissed faint when brushed by breeze from open vent. I adjusted dial. Scaling waveform produced matched circles and numbers, themselves distance between hum sequences aligned, mathematically with distance between storm drain loops measured across map center. Exact ratio, as though city itself had been tuned like string stretched across soil. Each line spiraled outward. Each hum vibrated back inward. For longer than I realized, I sat in trance before paper, lines burning into vision until veins hummed with pulse already established below me. My pen slipped loose, rolled to floor. My head sank forward, resting near the taped edges while playback hiss shook against earphones half resting. Over and over, same alignment hammered in. Denver's foundations formed instrument, not accident. A chamber long composed, disguised as civic transit. I spoke aloud even without recorder live, trying to convince myself denial fit. Drains, utility runs. They line up sometimes, but doubt never carried weight compared to precision. Voices in playback already matched. Pitches aligned. If a voice repeated ahead of me, if tunnels arranged like mouth, then sound wasn't product. It was designed out. My acoustician friend called back briefly, her tone less certain than earlier. She said resonance signatures this clean never appear unintentionally, never appear from ordinary storm control. She grew quiet, then added she didn't want further involvement. She asked not to be cited. When call dropped, silence hung heavier. I stared across photocopies and remembered her half-joke, a mouth. The idea pressed into marrow. A mouth doesn't only project. A mouth receives. A chamber of tunnels designed round the city as cavity, taking rainfall and transmuting it into voice signals carried across machines like mine. Recording devices don't reveal, they participate. The city above doesn't just sit on soil. It sits in throat of resonance. Every resident, each building, crowded in chamber shaped below, unaware their footsteps count as vibration fed forward into machine creation. I picked the recorder up, played once more, listening until my head ached. My ghost voice repeated lines ahead, slower, precise. Beneath it, hum drummed in patterns exactly equal to distance between circles on map. Not metaphor, flat perfection. A voice seated inside architecture waiting to be heard. I pressed pause, trembling. For the first time since arriving, I worried not about surveillance, not institution, not secrecy, but about scale. This wasn't equipment hidden beneath terminals or tunnels reserved for baggage. It was city length, regional, swallowing environment itself. The sound chamber extended beyond civic thresholds, built so long and deep no citizen could name it. Yet tonight I sat above, earphones filled with chords of structure alive. I whispered finely, voice so thin it felt transparent. This is not infrastructure. It's instrument. Saying it aloud shattered denial like glass cracking bared ear. I folded maps tight, stuffed them back under books before vision fully unraveled, though I knew paper carried no safety. Overhead, motel light shook faintly as storm pressed harder. I stared at ceiling, heart squeezing, understanding city was not host to system. City itself was body of system resonance cavity, built mouth, and in that mouth, I had already spoken. Dusk sank fast over the field as storm haze thickened, the horizon swallowed in black-violet clouds. I left my car behind the service fence where weeds grew high, slipping through a section cut months ago by someone braver or more desperate than me. The grass slapped wet across my shins, each step sucking into soft earth, turned to mud. Across the stretch, the runways lay oddly still wide plains of concrete, darker with pooling rain, lights distant like scattered stars. I hunched low and walked toward the silhouette that had drawn me here. A depression in the ground, a slope glimpsed once on satellite overlays and marked on no map's dot as I closed distance, the shape clarified. A wide door sunk into earth, half obscured by soil and gravel sliding down its sides. The metal surface reflected lightning faintly, jittering pale pulses each time the sky cracked white. No signage, no painted markings, just heavy steel with seams locked tight, except where glistening rivulets of rain cut channels downward. I crouched behind a berm, pulled the spectrometer from my pack, and clicked it awake. Its screen flared green for seconds before color drained to furious red. Numbers ascended uncontrollable, every wavelength spike stacked together until the limits jammed the display. The device whined, vibrating in my grip. Then the unit snapped off. Auto protection tripped by overload. I swore under my breath and grabbed the manual camera instead, pressing shutter at every half second while the meters sputtered lifeless. Lightning bathed the hangar surface with each exposure, rain twisting across lens glass in streaks. Mud bled into my palms as I tried to steady myself. Again and again the flash bleached dark into detail. Each picture froze fluctuating shadows across the sunken slope, bending as if air itself warped near the seam. Then the second layer arrived. Thunder cracked overhead, natural, ordinary, and yet threaded within it another sound. At first dull, more vibration than tone. But in moments it swelled, separating clearly in my ears through headphones still coiled around my neck from earlier capture. Not thunder. Low voices, chanting words too blurred to parse, or mechanical organs grinding into cadence that only resembled breath. My jaw locked tight, fear pressing into bone, yet I couldn't look away. The hangar itself seemed to exhale, metal vibrating with phrases it couldn't shape. My shoes slipped in the mud as I edged closer, foolish instinct pulling me despite warning. The chanting grew louder, now dragging at ribs with resonance deeper than thunder. I could feel it in cartilage, along the spaces where breath should stay private. Somewhere behind thunderclaps it framed syllables, breaking storm into ordered pulse. I whispered the words tumbling in head, recorded even as terror shook voice. This is a door. This is not closed. Sudden light seared the corner of vision. Security lamps on tall poles ignited in sequence, flooding runway edge in harsh white. My chest tightened. First instinct hide. I dropped instantly, pressing belly flat into soaked grass beside the ramp. Mud-filled pockets, smeared collar, my notebook soaking heavy. Beams widened, scanning across rain stutter. I watched them creep near, frame of white inching towards slope and hangar face. I forced breaths shallow, nose against soil, recorder grinding beneath ribs. For seconds, it seemed inevitable. The light would sweep across, catch me sprawled, hold me in sterile glare. Then an engine from far across field roared warning. The beam swung abrupt, turning to track something unseen on opposite side. My opening. I bolted, shoes sliding instantly, arms windmilling for desperate balance. The chant followed in ears, doubling through headphones that whipped against chest as I ran. Every step shrieked mud, trying to claim my weight. My lungs blazed, throat on fire. Each gasp mingled with impossible syllables still clawing from storm. Voices too alive for machine, yet too cold for prayer. Grass fields opened wide beyond concrete margin. I fled blindly into it, ignoring cuts, ignoring sodden earth-sucking shoes nearly off, ignoring burn in thighs and ribs. Behind me, the beam swept back, tracing air where I had been. Ahead, only black plain whipped by rain. The voices didn't fade. They carried, as though the hangar had marked me, assigned notes that clung long after distance should matter. By the time I collapsed to knees under sagging fences near outer lots, I could barely breathe. Mud crusted across knuckles, chest heaved sharp, camera pressed hard into ribs. My entire body quaked with adrenaline. It took minutes before I could even uncoil headphones to check device screen. Part of me feared absolute wipe tape blank, camera corrupted. I pressed play anyway, hunched over mud, rain still searing scalp. And there it was. The chant. Not lost, not dulled by storm collapse. Strong, layered, insistent, rolling on long past thunder had ceased above. Voices interlocked, mechanical wheeze overlapping choral strands, like machines giving life to vowels never meant for air. My own soundless breaths punctuated between, proof of my presence yet powerless against their alignment. Hours later in motel, dripping clothes piled in corner, I replayed once more. Storm outside had moved on, sky clearing faint. But through reels with headphones tight, chanting continued. Clearer in calm than in field, separate from weather. Voices survived storm they borrowed. They had never needed thunder. They only needed conduit unlocked by that door, the sinking steel that pretended blockade but thrummed alive beneath. I stared across wall, body still trembling from chase, hardly reassured by survival. What terrified most wasn't security light or overload spectrometer. It was endurance of voices unaffected by storm's end. If this was hangar door, then nothing sealed it. Instead, it remained breathing, receiving, chanting still. It was late. Hours passed when the motel should sink into true silence. The rain outside was light, no more than a thin mist drifting across the parking lot, but I kept my gear running anyway. The recorder hissed steady on the desk, a comfort and a threat at once. I leaned close, pencil gripped in shaking fingers, waiting for anything new to show itself in the static. The longer I listened, the more fatigued I became, ears folding over themselves, trying to distinguish real from bleed. Then it started. Buried low, nearly swallowed inside the surf of white noise. A pattern. Clearer with gain turned up. Numbers. At first plain repetition. 3377. I froze, pencil tip pressed hard into paper until it almost broke lead. The interval exact, no stumble, no human uncertainty. I recorded in low whisper, describing rhythm, noting that the sequence fell into place like clock gear. 3 beats, pause, 7 beats, pause, then restart. I checked clock on desk. 11:49, 70 seconds before forecast predicted the next rainfall. Right on cue, droplets tapped the window. My ears prickled when the static matched it. The numeric cycle had begun before the first drop landed. By 12 sharp, rain poured steady, and the hum beneath static shifted again. This time no pause. Continuous 7 stretching on, droning to the rhythm of storm. Each digit lined with intensity of weather outside, as if rain obeyed order spoken. Beneath hiss, I whispered to tape. Transmission predictive. Beginning ahead of sky. Ending exactly when storm ends. I felt absurd, speaking hypothesis against rushing noise, yet everything pointed taut. Because when clouds thinned, the numbers thinned too, falling back to neat cycle of 3, then silence. Coincidence would have required chaos. This was symmetry. This was command. Sleep impossible now. I scribbled lines faster than hand could follow. Every cycle noted, every interval drawn in restless circles. Words faltered, so I wrote digits instead, page after page. 33377. Sequences crawling beyond margin. The ink smeared underhand until all notes blurred gray. But still I kept going, veins thrumming to rhythm the way lungs had once sensed a phantom breath in corridor. This wasn't accident. This was pattern meant to be followed. I stared at the page, then pressed mic closer to mouth. I asked aloud, voice cracked from dried throat. Algorithm? Scheduled code? Or something watching rainfall and projecting it forward? I stopped speaking, ears straining for proof. Tape reels turned, his thickening around edges. My heart picked up hard, sweat cooling my back even though heater clicked low. The static shifted. Small at first, then sudden rupture. Numbers stumbled against each other, out of cycle. 337. 373. It felt like error, but the emphasis was too deliberate. My skin crawled with the recognition that the sequence broke only after my question. Not accident, response. My chest hollowed. My pencil snapped under grip, but still my hand scratched across page. I listed stuttered formations, unable to stop. I whispered again. If you hear me, what do you want? The rain outside stilled for a moment, tapering until only a few drops clinked metal roof of air conditioner. The tape responded with fracture 737, 333, broken timing, as though stumbling but purposeful. My blood ran cold. Nothing in previous hours had shifted that way. It listened. Or worse, it had always watched, waiting for acknowledgement before choosing to reply. My ribs ached from how shallow I breathed. I caught reflection of myself in the motel mirror, shoulders hunched, pen moving without command, face pale against lamp glow. Writing numbers furiously, as if hand alone understood sequence, though brain pleaded stop. I dropped pencil once, but fingers found second before thought. Circle, circle, digits layered until notebook brimmed like code spiral. No choice in motion. I pressed stop on recorder in panic, but reel dragged 2 more seconds before locking. Silence followed, naked, pressing harder on skull than hiss. I swore under breath that I wouldn't touch play again. But within 10 breaths my finger already pressed button. Tape hiss returned, emptier now. But beneath it faint arrangement of digits again, not spoken, but implied. Carried in wave folds like echoes of previous cycle, I whispered softly. Barely audible, resisting words but craving answers. You predict storms. Do you predict me? The tape stuttered sharp, breaking noise with jagged pause. Crackle, then faint numeric scatter, 3s drawn long, 7s cut short. I jerked upright. My stomach lurched. Like being named without name, the page before me was ruin, circles upon circles, digits sprawled. I realized I had lost sense of time, hand still drawing unconsciously, as if line carried current from signal into muscle fiber. My fingers cramped, graphite blackened skin between thumb and forefinger. I pressed notebook shut, shoved it aside, stood quick enough for chair to screech against floor. Anything to cut momentum. Still my thighs trembled, nerves scorched raw. I recorded through a throat stripped dry. Transmission anomalous. Not reporting, responding. My voice faltered halfway out, but it existed now, captured by tape. My hands shook so badly the mic rattled. The digits surged suddenly, distortion blooming higher, like surge of static layered with arithmetic. I yanked headphones off and still the sound seeped faint through machine speaker. I sat there stunned. Bare ears ringing to pattern not fully heard but fully felt. Infiltrating thought with insistence on repetition. It wasn't people on other end of band. Not broadcast towers feeding numbers into my night. This was signal alive between waves themselves, intimate as breath placed in marrow. The realization bled me cold and left me staring at reels, ticking onward steady, patient, unceasing. I couldn't stop hand from twitching back to pen. Notebook reopened before thought. Pages filled again. My wrist cramped, but still circle upon circle etched itself. The digits trailed without hesitation. 3, 3, 7, 373. My handwriting less mine with each pass, but something latched on. Guiding through cycles like tethered wire. Breath shaky, voice gone. I managed one last line into mic before exhaustion swallowed. I am being watched by what exists between sound waves. Then I lowered head to desk. Pencil still carving. Notebook sprawling. All sense of time dissolved as sequence burned itself endless across page. My hand nothing more than continuation of the signal clawing free through me. The jamming unit was heavier than I expected. A metal brick with edges dulled from years of constant handling. My contact had passed it off nervously, sliding it across the diner booth like contraband. He only said once, "Use it under rainfall, or you'll waste your chance." After that, he clammed up, eyes fixed on the window, like the very sight of the hardware might pull attention down on us. I carried it back to the motel under my jacket, its weight burning into my ribs the entire way. That night, the storm came right on schedule. Fat drops rattled against the thin walls, hissing across the parking lot and drowning every other sound of passing traffic. I cleared the desk, shoved maps and papers aside, and set the jamming unit at the center. 2 rotary dials on its front. A tiny red switch. I patched wires awkwardly into my recorder's output path, then into a frequency meter, then through a small amplifier to the speakers. My system looked insane, copper tape wound around terminals, wires crisscrossing like veins. But this was the only chance to fight back, even clumsily. I powered everything on and hit record. At first came the familiar hiss, the pulse hidden in rainfall. Then I flipped the jammer's switch. The sound curtained out all at once, static sucked under like a tide retreating. In headphones, a quieter field emerged, emptier, thin compared to the gnaw of interference. For the first time in nights, my scalp didn't prickle under invisible weight. I whispered steady into mic, trying to keep voice calm. Counter signal appears to succeed. Interference reduced. My chest swelled with relief I didn't dare trust. For 60 seconds, maybe less, calm reigned. I scribbled notes frantically, circled meter readings, whispered that suppression proved the signal wasn't atmospheric but imposed. That it could be cut. My hand shook with excitement. Rain fell cleanly against glass for once. No chant hid behind thunder. I almost believed I had scored control dot, and then the breaker blew. A surge slammed through wires, lights flickered like gasping lungs, and meters jumped to life, arrows spiking into corners they had never touched. Hiss roared back, not single but triple, splitting across bands in simultaneous crush. Headphones shrieked with distortion too high to interpret. My jamming unit groaned, heat rising from its casing, fan dead, body rattling as if gripped by seizure. I shouted into mic, voice cracking, sweat springing instantly across chest. Signal surge. Unexpected ramp. Units jammed. My narration scattered, words tumbling out half-formed as panic forced syllables faster than thoughts. The lights overhead stuttered into near darkness, weak glow coughing along plaster seams. I stared horrified at the tape reels. They fought rotation, gears whining, then locked altogether. Film spooled half an inch before jerking still. Everything mechanical died at once, leaving only storm-pounding glass. I backed away from desk, crouched against bed, hand over mouth. Nothing moved but rain pressing into motel unit. My lungs scrambled for direction, shallow, refusing steady pattern. I narrated still small, stammering, desperate voice notes despite silence. Each word rasped like scratching matchwood. Internal logic insisted, record evidence no matter if system dead. But the heaviness of air convinced me it was listening still. Something nested in blackout, waiting for fear to crest. 5 minutes crawled by before system stirred again. A low hum. A faint clunk of fan blades turning belabored. One lamp blinked back to life, stuttering. Recorder reels lurched, spitting magnetic tape a fraction before crawling again. Devices woke ragged. But the jamming unit never revived. Its switch lay tipped, unlit, cold. I flipped it thrice, pounded casing with palm. Nothing. Its life shut off as though power carved out precise. My contact wouldn't be surprised, I knew. He had expected this. I slumped into chair, adrenaline flooding out as teeth chattered. I pressed play on the surviving tape, dread-gnawing. Expectation of mishmash distortion. Expectation of blank. Instead, what poured through headphones shattered me deeper. My own narration. Not the clean explanation from start. The collapse. My voice repeating the panicked fragment. Signal surge. Units jammed. Over and over, etched with staggered distortion. The exact moment of breakdown, captured like chant and folded back, I replayed, sick. My insides seized with realization. The system had taken my error as cue. Learned rhythm of collapse. Now it looped me as fragment. It knew my voice cracking under pressure and pressed it back until it struck as chorus. Whispering, chanting version of me gasping inside static. My attempt at harm hadn't muted it. My attempt had been absorbed, rewritten into scope of its noise. I trembled, headset sliding crooked across hair. I pressed stop desperately, fingers white on button. Reels continued 3 seconds more, like always, dragging silence too smooth, littered with faint echo of my own breath at edge. Then paused. I jolted up, reached to unplug power, then froze, because silence like that no longer carried safety. Silence meant it was between currents, already carving new method. I sat hunched, staring at corpse of jamming unit, smell of fried circuits leaking into motel air. Ash taste coated my tongue, throat dry. I muttered hopelessly into mic, still recording. Counterattack failed. Proof that it adjusts. Proof that it learns. My voice fractured, slow. Already imagining playback, the collapse that would come when reels ran forward again. Fear not only that attempt failed, but that attempt strengthened. I couldn't stop whispering it. Proof that it learned from me. Proof the storm would never again play only its own voice. The jamming unit was heavier than I expected. A metal brick with edges dulled from years of constant handling. My contact had passed it off nervously, sliding it across the diner booth like contraband. He only said once, "Use it under rainfall, or you'll waste your chance." After that, he clammed up, eyes fixed on the window like the very sight of the hardware might pull attention down on us. I carried it back to the motel under my jacket, its weight burning into my ribs the entire way. That night, the storm came right on schedule. Fat drops rattled against the thin walls, hissing across the parking lot and drowning every other sound of passing traffic. I cleared the desk, shoved maps and papers aside, and set the jamming unit at the center. 2 rotary dials on its front. A tiny red switch. I patched wires awkwardly into my recorder's output path, then into a frequency meter, then through a small amplifier to the speakers. My system looked insane, copper tape wound around terminals, wires crisscrossing like veins. But this was the only chance to fight back, even clumsily. I powered everything on and hit record. At first came the familiar hiss, the pulse hidden in rainfall. Then I flipped the jammer's switch. The sound curtained out all at once, static sucked under like a tide retreating. In headphones, a quieter field emerged, emptier, thin compared to the gnaw of interference. For the first time in nights, my scalp didn't prickle under invisible weight. I whispered steady into mic, trying to keep voice calm. Counter signal appears to succeed. Interference reduced. My chest swelled with relief I didn't dare trust. For 60 seconds, maybe less, calm reigned. I scribbled notes frantically, circled meter readings, whispered that suppression proved the signal wasn't atmospheric but imposed. That it could be cut, My hand shook with excitement. Rain fell cleanly against glass for once. No chant hid behind thunder. I almost believed I had scored Control Dot, and then the breaker blew. A surge slammed through wires, lights flickered like gasping lungs, and meters jumped to life, arrows spiking into corners they had never touched. Hiss roared back, not single but triple, splitting across bands in simultaneous crush. Headphones shrieked with distortion too high to interpret. My jamming unit groaned, heat rising from its casing, fan dead, body rattling as if gripped by seizure. I shouted into mic, voice cracking, sweat springing instantly across chest. Signal surge. Unexpected ramp. Units jammed. My narration scattered, words tumbling out half-formed as panic forced syllables faster than thoughts. The lights overhead stuttered into near darkness, weak glow coughing along plaster seams. I stared horrified at the tape reels. They fought rotation, gears whining, then locked altogether. Film spooled half an inch before jerking still. Everything mechanical died at once, leaving only storm-pounding glass. I backed away from desk, crouched against bed, hand over mouth. Nothing moved but rain pressing into motel unit. My lungs scrambled for direction, shallow, refusing steady pattern. I narrated still small, stammering, desperate voice notes despite silence. Each word rasped like scratching matchwood. Internal logic insisted, record evidence no matter if system dead. But the heaviness of air convinced me it was listening still. Something nested in blackout, waiting for fear to crest. 5 minutes crawled by before system stirred again. A low hum. A faint clunk of fan blades turning belabored. One lamp blinked back to life, stuttering. Recorder reels lurched, spitting magnetic tape a fraction before crawling again. Devices woke ragged. But the jamming unit never revived. Its switch lay tipped, unlit, cold. I flipped it thrice, pounded casing with palm. Nothing. Its life shut off as though power carved out precise. My contact wouldn't be surprised, I knew. He had expected this. I slumped into chair, adrenaline flooding out as teeth chattered. I pressed play on the surviving tape, dread-gnawing. Expectation of mishmash distortion. Expectation of blank. Instead, what poured through headphones shattered me deeper. My own narration. Not the clean explanation from start. The collapse. My voice repeating the panicked fragment. Signal surge. Units jammed. Over and over, etched with staggered distortion. The exact moment of breakdown, captured like chant and folded back. I replayed, sick. My insides seized with realization. The system had taken my error as cue. Learned rhythm of collapse. Now it looped me as fragment. It knew my voice cracking under pressure and pressed it back until it struck as chorus. Whispering, chanting version of me gasping inside static. My attempt at harm hadn't muted it. My attempt had been absorbed, rewritten into scope of its noise. I trembled, headset sliding crooked across hair. I pressed stop desperately, fingers white on button. Reels continued 3 seconds more, like always, dragging silence too smooth, littered with faint echo of my own breath at edge. Then paused. I jolted up, reached to unplug power, then froze, because silence like that no longer carried safety. Silence meant it was between currents, already carving new method. I sat hunched, staring at corpse of jamming unit, smell of fried circuits leaking into motel air. Ash taste coated my tongue, throat dry. I muttered hopelessly into mic, still recording. Counterattack failed. Proof that it adjusts. Proof that it learns. My voice fractured slow. Already imagining playback, the collapse that would come when reels ran forward again. Fear not only that attempt failed, but that attempt strengthened. I couldn't stop whispering it. Proof that it learned from me. Proof the storm would never again play only its own voice. I called him the next morning, my hand trembling on the receiver, the motel room still smelling of smoke from the burned jamming unit. He didn't answer. His voicemail clicked after 6 rings, a quick shift into soft tape hiss, then his voice. But it wasn't the usual recorded greeting. It was his live cadence, halting. Call me back. Then a pause of breath. Call me back. Again and again. 10 times in a row, each one unraveling like fabric, the tone weaker, syllables slipping mid-breath. Not digital loop, not network stutter. Flesh breaking down while still recorded in motion. I whispered his name into the line, thinking he might pick up midway. The loop never altered. By the 8th repeat, the gasp between words deepened, as if his lungs were straining. By the 10th, it was no longer speech, but a gasp carrying fragments of consonants. And then emptiness, the carrier dropping dead. I stood frozen with phone pressed against ear, long after line disconnected. I didn't wait. I drove west, rain striking windshield sharp, wipers failing against volume. His street pooled in slick water, gutter drains overwhelmed. The house sat dark, curtains pulled, front lights dead. I tried knocking first 3 times, then pressing ear close against the door. No motion, only faint whistle of wind slipping through cracks. I circled to the back window, where slight opening in the frame let storm slip inside. Rain rattled blinds, blowing them faintly like lungs exhaling ragged. I pushed the window fully and climbed across sill, landing in his study. The smell hit first ozone, dust heated too fast, magnetic tape raw against wood. My flashlight beam swept across floorboards, scattered with unspooled reels, black ribbons twisting in puddles carried by storm wind. The desk was half collapsed under weight of overturned gear. No shoes in entry. No coat on hook. He wasn't there. I crouched, palms trembling against soaked reels. Every strand reflected stormlight, writhing like serpents at rest. At the desk, one recorder remained upright, its reel turned fully outward, tape consumed. I pressed stop reset, then play with hands jerking. The speaker whined, caught rainfall heavy, hiss thick over bass rumbles. And then his voice. Quieter than I remembered, but intact. He whispered into the mic, words stretched thin, not alone. The hush that followed consumed more than air, it smothered, a silence with teeth. Then, faint. My name, spoken bare at end of reel. Just once, crisp enough to slice bone. No inflection, no context, yet none but him could have said it. I pulled headphones off violent, staggered upright, the desk striking my thigh. My chest heaved. No one else lived here. No neighbor in silence. Only his empty room, wind leaking. I ripped open drawers, found more tapes, played fragments. Each one collapsed into distortion quicker, sentences cut short, breaths dragged from non-existent lungs. He had been speaking when something stole words into hush. I slammed each stop button in fury, cursed my own insistence on more evidence when absence screamed truth louder. The window rattled again, storm spraying papers. I backed away, refusing to turn my head even though sway of blinds resembled figures shifting in edge vision. My knees weakened. I knew then the signal hadn't been confined to walls of motel or tunnels under runways. It traveled transparent, reached across wires, into homes. Found him first because he gave me tool it wanted, because he had touched raw line closer than me. I tightened grip around the recorder still hot from last play. The tape inside no longer matter of note, but relic. If he had been consumed, gone outright or drawn elsewhere, then only breath of his voice remained. One flattened coil of plastic rolling him toward oblivion, yet printing his last resistance. Not alone. If names matter to it, then the fact mine was last spoken means tether has shifted. I stumbled into rain through the same open window, recorder clutched under jacket. Roads shimmered black, water climbing tires. My knuckles whitened against steering wheel, mind locked in loop of his faltering voicemail. 10 repetitions of plea shredded until lungs collapsed. I couldn't drive straight, weaving lanes, terror burning behind sternum. Yet I could not rid myself of machine weight, sitting on seat beside. Proof heavier than stone. Whisper locked forever to its tape. Hours later, back at my room, I replayed once more despite better judgment. His sighs dragged weak, rain louder than his body. Then that final whisper, cracked but resolute, "Not alone," followed by abrupt cut. Longer silence unfurling until headphone hiss left me dizzy. My heart froze, bracing for next. It came. My name, carved without echo. A final hand extended across collapsing wall of white. I shut everything down. Unplugged wires, dimmed lamps until room drowned in heavy quiet. I couldn't erase knowledge that the signal reached through him. I bypassed controls, claimed voice mid-breath, and reprinted it on machines left running. He was gone, and yet alive inside tape, segments cut and drawn against his will. I crawled into bed with hands shaking uncontrollable, recorder still clutched like blade. My mind spun on edges of collapse. I knew no matter how much denial whispered along marrow, this wasn't accident. It had learned me through him. Spoken me by name, claimed me next. Proof sat less in words caught than in absence left behind. A human erased, leaving only breath on tape. I closed eyes, but storm still whispered, blinds still rattled. Tape reels scattered across memory, unspooling without end. I couldn't sleep, not after hearing his last words unravel inside that tape. My chest locked up at every storm cloud still dragging low over the city. Instead of resting, I dragged the receiver back onto the desk and widened the sweep. No longer the few safe bands marked by habit. I dialed across AM, shortwave, every margin I could reach. At first, just noise, the soft hiss I knew. Then, all at once, tonal clusters swelled across every channel I skimmed. Identical, layered, like blooms growing out of wet earth at the same second. My heart dropped. Not confined here, not isolated. Multiplicity woven into the air across every signal path I touched. I kept turning the dial, desperate for variation. Every notch landed on the same pattern, slow pulses stitched together by faint harmonic trails. The song I now recognized like a scar. I recorded them all, feeling sweat along the line of my jaw. I placed stopwatch on desk, scared of what I'd confirm. 112 ticks between bursts. The same across every band, no matter the stated frequency. Perfectly synchronized. I whispered into mic, "This is everywhere. This is orchestration." My voice shook as I said it, because evidence weighed more than denial now. The phone began ringing throughout that afternoon. Not to me directly, but to my source line. Small communities outside Denver. Farmers, night clerks, strangers who claimed they hadn't slept through storms in weeks. Each spoke with manic exhaustion. They kept hearing voices muttered inside rainfall, radios switching on all by themselves. One woman cried as she admitted the hum followed her home, whispering to her children when she tried to put them to bed. I noted every call into the recorder, adding timestamp after timestamp. The more I heard, the deeper the pit in my gut grew. Then came the letter slipped under my door. Handwritten, urgent scrawl from a medical doctor 100 miles east. He'd begun seeing patients during every rain streak week. Nervous tremors, auditory hallucinations, phantom broadcasts leaching through waiting rooms and kitchens. He said in his note that he didn't want attention, only understanding. Can sound spread like virus? It was his last sentence to me. I folded the page slowly and placed it under weight of my notebooks. I couldn't bring myself to answer. That evening I stitched all of it together. Reel-to-reel spliced clips, stacking sounds I'd collected since first approach to mural. The baggage hum. The map knocks. The corridor footsteps. The mouth-like resonance. The chanting at the hangar. And now, sensed clusters from towns far beyond airport reach. Sitting hunched against flickering lamp, I layered storms close and far across timeline, set metronome beats, and realized with dread that everyone aligned. Different days, different towns. Same minute, same second, hitting peaks as though guided by central hand. I whispered into live mic. It's one orchestrator. Saying the words drained heat clean from my chest. I stared at the dark window. The storm outside played simple, tired drops against metal casing. But within those drops came another pressure, a slow curve of breath in every space between taps. Exhaustion crashed over me. I had thought myself an archivist, one man stringing anomalies into narrative. But the more I stitched tapes, the more I realized I was inside its draft. My edits only clarified its structure. I wasn't building proof, I was acting like its editor. Fatigue bent my body down, but I couldn't stop. As dawn smeared pale across motel blinds, I slumped toward the speaker and caught the faintest whisper threading gaps. At first nonsense, then clearer. Syllables trying to fill silence between drops. One by one, names. Out of place, scattered, foreign, familiar. My hands stiffened when my own name emerged again, hushed like lips pressed close to ear. I froze. Ink from my pen spread wide, because the tip pressed unmoving against paper. I thought of the logbook my FAA contact showed me. Notations about passengers weeks later, still hearing voices that were never theirs. After images printed to memory. Maybe this was the same scale, only widened. Entire towns thick with phantom broadcasts, naming individuals until their bodies belonged to echo. The eye of the storm was no longer airport walls. The resonance chamber stretched across every storm front like blood pumping from heart. Denver was not center, but merely one mouth among hundreds. The idea left my spine cold as frost. I leaned forward, recording still live. This is not Denver. This is not local. The airport is one hub. My throat cracked around last syllable. Suddenly, I noticed my reflection in motel window. My lips moved fractions slower than the whisper that carried my name. I stared hard, unblinking, realizing I was already trailing behind its voice by heartbeats. My memory might not be my own measure anymore. Rain thudded harder above roof, banding in pulses too exact. I switched dial, desperate for frequency that didn't carry the cluster. None existed. Everything repeated, fractal loops of sound identical. Stations toppled into one shape folded together. Tears burned unbidden in eyes as fatigue broke into hysteria. I scraped pen across final page until paper tore. Circling name, circling town lists from calls. Clutching proof like weapon, I was left trembling in room thick with whispers that refused end. And for the first time I understood scale. Not silence, not interference, but structure. A machine laid into clouds, waters, and breath itself. My hub already found me. My name already chosen. And soon, beyond Denver, beyond one airport. Every storm would carry more. The rain had churned the ground into gullies. Soil caved near the edge of fencing so deep it exposed infrastructure that should never see sky. I followed the collapse along a dented service road until the earth gaped wide, spilling mud into a dark shaft lined by concrete rings. No signs marked it, no covers or locks left. The storm had chewed them loose. I stood with recorder in hand, lamp strapped to my head, and looked down. Even above, I felt vibration crawling up my legs, subtle hum that lived more in bone than air. I lowered myself carefully, boots grinding into softened clay, my bag bumping my hip as I slid. The shaft narrowed, then opened sudden into a chamber wider than any need for simple drainage. My light washed over smooth walls lined with sealed modules, steel plates inset like hundreds of gray tuning forks trapped in concrete. Many bore rust rivulets streaking down their lengths, but none were broken. Each radiated a resonance low enough that flesh rather than ears carried it. Ribs drumming faint against their steady pulse stopped my recorder spiked at once. Red light on the meter trembled in impossible patterns, skipping digits, maxing where no battery should allow. I whispered into mic with throat already tight. Levels uncontrollable. Resonance unnatural. The words cracked. Beneath them, reels scrambled, tape snarling sharp under new weight of sound. I kept moving deeper. The passage curved, floor slick where rainwater smeared across it. Every shift of boots set reflections trembling along wall, surfaces breathing as though stretched by pulse of unseen diaphragm. Then came flood of tone, no longer background hum but total immersion. Vibration poured straight into chest cavity. Ribs rang like struck glass. Heart fluttered wrong to match beats, threaded too low for structure built by men. I bent double, clutching sternum, mouth wide for air that no longer entered right. My lungs failed to separate signal from oxygen. Still I pressed forward, dragging will against gravity steeper than any hill. My lamp flickered with each surge. Steel modules glinted in sequence like teeth in jawline curving on and on. My recorder screamed numbers across meter, its motor coughing, still capturing, plastic body brittle against magnitude. I narrated barely gasping phrases into mic, not designed for people, designed for reception. Foundations built as instrument. Each word nearly vomited as throat choked from air becoming vibratory sludge. At corridor bend my knees gave out. I crashed to hands, palms slapping puddles. The resonance thickened until skin rippled. My arms shook from vibrations traveling outward, buzzing tendons like wires stretched taut. Head swam as if brain case filled with low tide. I gagged, cheek pressed against wet concrete, trying not to release stomach. Tears blurred my vision. The lamp flickered, then stabilized. Through haze I saw steam lift where water traced module seams, as though steel inhaled vapor from storm above. I tried crawling forward but collapsed again, ribs shrieking each time frequency swelled. My jaw clattered involuntarily. Breath pulled external, exhaled sound rather than wind. In moment between surges, I caught myself sobbing aloud in broken syllables. No one else answered. Only resonance mimicked rhythm back. Terrified I would never rise again, I turned body slow onto side and began dragging towards shaft mouth. Each inch blared louder, crawling backward shredded knees. Every contact with floor sent tremors long vein through thighs. Halfway, the tones reached crescendo unbearable. Whole tunnel shook not as earthquake, but as exacting rhythm, like bell rung deep under sea. My teeth knocked until gums bled. Recorder moaned mechanical, reels rotating seized. I thought for certain ribs would split like hollow wood under tuning fork. I screamed raw, the voice itself bent, shredded into overtones not human. Yet even my agony pitched itself to frequency mapped around modules. I was folded into score written below ground before I was born. At shaft incline, I pulled with remaining strength. Arms slipping in mud collapse carried down from storm. Gravel tore skin. Lamp toppled sideways, beam jittering across ceiling. I kept dragging until faint rush of real rain air touched face. Crawling with elbows like desperate soldier, each breath caught scant oxygen free of vibration. Finally, knees cleared rise. I collapsed on grass above, body twitching spasm after spasm. The hum did not follow up. As if boundary contained resonance tight beneath foundation. Out here, only storm-pressed body, real drops cold enough to sting torn skin. I rolled onto back, chest buzzing still as though ribs remembered frequency carved into them. For endless minutes my arms spasmed uncontrolled, muscles flickering and stutter, not belonging. When at last stillness returned, I dragged recorder from bag. Its light dimmed, flickering, but still alive. Tape reels mangled, stretched, yet within them soundproofed. I leaned against fence post, breath cracked, throat rasp iron. I whispered final through wrecked voice, committed line to last surviving tape. The airport is not built for planes, not built for passage. It is built for reception. Saying it scorched lungs, truth heavier than storm falling steady. My body vibrated yet, marrow aching, Proof now lived in both tape and trembling of my own chest cavity. Resonance set inside bones, refusing release. I drove 3 towns over just to find him. A retired surveyor, shoulders bent from stone and soil, but eyes still sharp enough to sketch a floor plan from memory alone. He used to chart drainage grids, slope measurements, soil compressions, all the hidden lines that keep cities standing. Now he lived alone in a small clapboard house with overgrown hedges. He let me in only after long silence at the door, his hand gripping the frame like a man fighting with himself. Inside, rolls of maps lay stacked in corners under dust, tubes discolored and crumbling at edges. He didn't let me touch them. We sat instead at a kitchen table scarred with burn rings, the air tinged with copper. When I nudged at questions, he resisted at first, muttering that secrets kept him safe enough through retirement. But weariness wore down his guard. He stared into his trembling fingertips and said the words that confirmed everything. The underground structures were real. They had been documented extensively and deliberately erased from later charts. He spoke low, sentences brief, like a man unspooling rope he meant to cut after. What unsettled him most was the symmetry. Not in the visible airport, but below. Shapes radiating outward like petals, curves aligning at distances no engineer would assign by chance. He had measured antenna formations once during contract projects for military posts. What lay beneath Denver resembled those patterns too cleanly. A giant schematic laid in soil, hidden by concrete mouth above. Listening posts disguised as ground itself. I clicked on my recorder, needing proof. That switch alone changed his eyes. He stiffened, jaw tightening. Rain began outside, smattering the roof, tapping window edges. Almost instantly, the device picked up spike. High-pitched squeal, sharper than anything I had captured before, enough to sting teeth through bone. He winced, clutched his nose. A streak of blood appeared sudden against his lip. His chair screeched against tile as he shoved back, panicked. He begged, breath ragged and voice hoarse. "Stop recording, stop. This isn't transmission anymore. It's invitation." The squeal jolted harder. The needle on the meter slammed forward and quivered pinned. I sat frozen, my own ears burning raw with the pitch that seemed above ordinary sound, but ripping down spine like current. He pressed cloth against nose, groaning, sweat running down his temples. Fear rasped through his words again. He shouted for me to end the taping, insisted anything further meant opening a gate not ours to close. His voice faltered in pitch, then cracked. I reached forward fast, thumb beating the switch, shutting down the recorder. But damage lingered. My own skull hummed with residue, bone marrow vibrating impossible. He slumped against backrest, cloth-soaked dark now pressed tight. His shoulders shook once, then stilled, eyes sharp but terrified. I couldn't stay. I mumbled apology, half-whispered notes. But he shook his head violently, gestured at door. "Go. Leave." His body trembled in refusal of further words. I carried my bag out in silence. Chest tight, stomach twisted with shame. Outside, rain slicked the porch and blurred hedges into trembling shapes. I hurried through it, refusing to look back. Not until I reached car did I realize my recorder light faintly blinked, though I had switched it off. My hand shook as I opened pack. Against will I pressed play for seconds. His last words bled through, but fractured, split mid-syllable, as if air had torn them apart before coil caught whole. Halves of words folded, sucked inward. My gut turned to ice. I slammed stop. Static curtained room of car. The idea burrowed deep. Words themselves might be risk. Speech could be anchor for whatever pulled through. For first time since all this began, true instinct said be silent. And yet, minutes later, I still found my throat whispering notes, refusing to leave blank. Weak voice carried onto tape despite fear. "It has me now. Proof marked in blood from last ally. Proof etched in my own whisper. And worse, I cannot stop narrating. The storm had dragged me back, same as always. Clouds shredded overhead, black torn loose by jagged veins of light. I parked far from the gates, boots thudding into soaked ground, clothes pulling heavy with rain even before I scaled the fence. I didn't think of consequences anymore. Security, trespass, arrest all felt pale compared to what waited below. I was running out of time. My ribs still trembled from the last resonance. Every breath carried vibration deep as memory. I pressed the recorder against my chest as if it were stethoscope or shield and stepped inside. The gate lock was thick with rust. A floodlight flared above, throwing down white glare, but I crawled through an older breach left in corrugated wall. Inside, the corridor's beams sagged with damp, red streaks creeping down steel. The air reeked of oxidation and mold, every surface bleeding age. The storm growled beyond roof plates, each impact carrying into the hollow steel like drum booms. I moved forward fast, sneakers dragging puddles across floor seams. Recorder swinging at my side dotted the corridor's end. The space widened, sloping down into something impossible. A dome revealed itself gradually, concrete shell smoothed beyond machinery needs. Circular, perfect geometry, ribs of support coiling like swallowed bones. My headlamp cut arcs across curved walls, and light returned faint shimmer, as though some sheen lived in pores of rock. The silence here wasn't silence at all. Sound quivered, as though waiting, walls vibrating faintly. Even rain above shuddered into rhythm, the structure dictated. I clicked record, voice trembling automatic. Entered main chamber. Geometry aligned, dome perfect. My voice stammered but carried. Then, moments later, tape already replayed what I hadn't yet said. Words slipped ahead of me, half-second too soon, speaker anticipating my phrases. My skull locked tight. I spoke again, slower this time, testing resonance. A reply carried back first, then my true voice followed. My body chilled as realization struck. The dome narrated me before I moved, folding response into cause. I forced myself to test it. I raised arm. Seconds before it lifted, tape hissed cut of motion narrated. Raising arm. Then my elbow followed, dragged up by puppet instinct after. Nervous laughter cracked from lips, tears closed behind. I screamed into recorder, voice high and raw. The echo returned instantly but bent, not true life. It spoke fragments faster, stammering, stitched with other voices woven from old tape's voices not mine. Layers collapsed with mine until name cracked faint back, shifting vowel mid-syllable, changing identity into amalgam. Walls quivered. I snapped hands to ears, but couldn't block it. The dome carried rumble through ribs, not surface. My heart galloped arrhythmic, like beats belonged not to me, but to dome itself. I tried a focus test, shouting my own name, careful, solid. The reply came warped. My syllables returned slightly off, shaped tight with dozens of others chanting within, every voice slipping like tide into mine. It was not echo, but consumption wall lending back only hybrid. 30 minutes. 40. Time blurred. Every attempt to force proof folded into failure. Tape reels ran endlessly, filling with voice fragments ahead of schedule, anticipating toe steps, shoulder shrugs, coughs. Nothing belonged fully anymore. I grew dizzy counting playback that outpaced me. My hands scribbled in notebook, but pen caught too often repeating letters without control. Loops widening until I scrawled circles, not words. My skull pounded with hollow pressure, like head stuffed with wet tape spools, spinning forward too fast. At some point, I thought I glimpsed figures on rim of dome. Shadows shifting, merging with curve. No edges but outlines like human silhouettes, pressed flush into wall itself, waiting. I stumbled sideways, never approaching, but their still presence quaked lungs. Headlamp flickered, blinds burned static across vision. I whispered again as anchor. This is documentation. Yet tape voice returned it faster and firmer, mockery and calm cadence. I wanted answer, but I was losing ownership of each test. The rain overhead had tripled in volume, hammering steel roof until vibrations turned ground into pulse. The dome drew it in, amplified booms into bass thick enough to rattle teeth. Each strike hit body like shove, as though storm itself pressed deliberate. My legs weakened, knees buckled onto floor slick. I clawed to rise, but voice already recorded collapse. Down, it said, and then spine obeyed, curling me into mud before I could resist. For an hour, maybe more, I chased proof around circle, trying to speak faster than dome, desperate to seize line of narration back. Impossible. It swallowed initiative, dragged every word into sequence already scripted. Attempts at randomness, nonsense syllables, coughs, false leaps returned too sharp, predicted too close. The dome knew me before I commanded myself. Even breaths failed to feel chosen. My mouth burned from dryness. Lips cracked. Still I talked. Still I explained, because silence terrified more. What if silence meant dome narrating without me? I feared leaving blank reel. Afraid record would fill with someone else entirely. Curse of compulsion deeper than fear, I pressed again. Throat bleeding, lines not mine from me, but pressed into me. Hands jittered across damp pages, filling notebooks both with names and blanks, repeating by hour's end. Exhaustion claimed shoulders. Body quivered, slow shock. Ears rung raw. The recorder whined faint rotation. Then roof above thundered final deluge, hammering so hard chamber trembled beneath. Rain pulse drove downward, steel thudded like palm smacking roof of coffin. Caught beneath that weight, dome quaked double. I gasped sharp, chest collapsing. Symbols scrawled beyond page. Head hit wall. Still reel spun, and from speaker now poured not voice alone, but identity stretched. My name repeated broken, vowels torn out then resealed with others. U-U-O. Every whisper bent like jaws grinding syllables before swallow. My own rhythms drowned in fresher tones growing from walls. I screamed, but now voice carried only delay after dome had said it first. Storm pressed harsh against roof steel above, pushing me deeper into earth, as if roof itself weighed like ocean pressing wreck. Every footstep, every gasp, every last mark of me already narrated out of sequence. I slumped against wet floor. Rain amplifying above, dome crooning response ahead of time. And at last terror deepened into certainty. I wasn't documenting anymore. I was becoming documentation. The air outside struck colder than before. Raw sheets of moisture sliding over asphalt, each drop falling harder than forecast had promised. Hours had passed since the dome, yet storm had not moved on. Every earlier report claimed tapering by dawn, the usual drift across plains. Instead, the rain deepened, dragging time into loops stretched long beyond nature. Clouds pressed low into roofs of terminal. Cars trailed through parking lots inches deep in flood, every bolt and beam groaning wet. Thunder came irregular, not chaos but measured drum. I shuffled unsteady, hair plastered, recorder heavy against ribs, notebook sagging squelch against jacket. Inside terminal, exhaustion wade through flows of stranded travelers. Fluorescent strobed faint jitter, reflecting crowds in blur. I caught fragments of conversation while moving slow along glass. At first just fatigue complaints, then sharper edge. Phrases I recognized. Lines already scribbled in past days' notes. Word by word passengers repeating dialogue I logged hours ago, days ago. A man muttered about luggage belt stutter. Same syllables I wrote in margin Tuesday. A woman comforted her child quoting line identical to record I revised last storm. My scalp crawled. Time wasn't unfolding open. Recordings had spilled into air, feeding sentences into mouths not their own. I retreated toward bench. Notebook shook in my hands as I opened to spread pages. Deja vu dripped across them like ink poured uncontrolled. Everything I wrote now had already marked page before I thought it. Words met me before I moved. My eyes blurred reading them quicker than pen sliding lines. Loops entangled. I felt hands not mine, yet attached pushing script. My stomach turned violent. Rain hammered louder, pulling thin line between inside and outside so wall faded useless. Sound-filled terminal as though roof not present. I reached into bag frantically, grabbed a cassette I had nearly worn raw from use. Loaded into deck, thumb-shoving play. Tape hiss flared, then my own haggard commentary from prior days. And then chills split spine. Because sequence of words not just archive, they aligned with moment outside glass. When voice on tape announced storm breaking heavier, drops beyond glass thickened instantly, turning parking lot into smear. When voice reported lightning crest at east wing, thunder pealed in exact timing over horizon. Tape did not mark record. Tape scripted what roof above acted. I yanked headphones free, yet could still feel storm corralling into commands behind me. People in rows laid heads against hands, repeating mutters like chorus chant. Some hissed an argument, and then phrases overlapped in perfect loops, same sentence doubled forward. Tiny errors jittered them, stammering. The cycle repeating like taped overlay warping spool. Children cried, but rhythms locked into pattern. I whispered fate, throat ragged into mic still running. Recordings spilling forward, dictating reality. My eyes fixed wide on soaked tarmac. Helicopters cut sound overhead, rotor thump thick, circling, vibrating entire ceiling beams. Yet outside glass no machines appeared. The noise consumed space with invisibles that carried as weight without presence. Passengers looked up, craned necks, murmured to each other scripted awe. Musical loops bled through their tones. I pressed note, they circle unseen. Fear hollowed chest. For seconds I considered silence entire. Shut recorder, lock notes. And yet whisper still spilled from me. Blood in mouth, copper faint. I managed enough to crack question, voice trembling too thin to ground. Are we documenting a place, or are we inside recording being replayed? As syllables slipped, I sensed answer given in roof thunder itself. Rain struck timed pulses, no longer random, sinking to my cracked breath. Each droplet against glass-aligned pattern. Every repetition reinforced. Not observer but subject. I pushed palms against temples, pressure failing. Notebook slid down knees, pages soaked through by drips off coat. Lines blurred and ran like water wearing ink forward. Names crawled faint from margins, repeating, stacked. Mine at bottom, staring sharp black. Heart reeled. The terminal hummed faint exhale, all human voices pressing into loop. Helicopters still drummed but never showed. Lights flickered. Forecast long betrayed. Rain without end pummeled rhythm, as if roof itself spun reels of sky tape, consuming everything forward. I stepped out from the terminal doors into the storm as though it called me. The air slammed against face and chest, sheets of rain so heavy they bruised. Wind drove water into ears, into nose, into every seam of clothing, until I felt skinned raw. I carried microphones bare in each hand, cords trailing like veins into the recorder, slung against neck. I didn't bother finding cover. Not this time. I wanted it full, all at once. I whispered into mic low that I was here, that this was my conduit moment. Thunder kicked like warning, but I refused pause. The reels spun instantly when I hit record. Not usual rotation, but blur so fast capstans screamed. Magnetic tape spat outward in streams, unraveling like entrails across soaked asphalt. The edges clung to my boots, then plastered themselves onto my soaked clothes, climbing like living material. I staggered under pull, but did not stop. Every rib inside chest shook, both painful and euphoric. Vibrations traveled spine like lightning held permanent. I gasped, half choking, half laughing, afraid my sternum would split clean down the middle from sheer pressure of resonance. Rainfall shifted. Drops no longer distinct from air. The storm blurred into audible shapes. Each sheet of water carried voices thick, countless, impossible to track as individuals. Thousands calling names like prayer lists, each intonation collapsed into another until chorus formed. I clamped eyes closed, hearing names not only world-bound but familiar. Long-buried memories, languages half forgotten. My own name mixed within, pulled sharp but quick among them. They did not chant departures. They chanted arrivals, as if greeting me not as witness but return. My knees bent under weight of collective presence. The spectrometer screen lit under coat glow. Digits racing upward, levels disobeying unit limits until it snapped bright white. Numbers collapsed, pixels tearing marks across display. A hiss cracked loud, like vacuum tube shattering. Then nothing. Burn smell rose sharp. Sensors fried completely, circuits useless. Yet microphones still sucked storm full, cable vibrating direct into skull. The chorus thickened, building faster, layered upon layered until every drop of rain carried dozens of voices. When lightning struck nearby tarmac, it didn't roar, it sang. Syllables burning behind white glow. I screamed into void, voice stolen from storm itself. No reply came individually, only greater swell. Tape reels vomited footage across pavement, plastic ribbon curling in rivers. My chest convulsed. Ribs resonated so fast I feared collapse inward. I pressed palm against heart, certain I would feel nothing but blur of vibration under sternum. My shadow repeated erratic from lightning. Each image bent different angle, as though multitudes stood overlapped with me. I shouted that I could not carry more, pleaded for end, but pleas dissolved into chorus. Then, all at once, the noise sliced. Like guillotine swing across atmosphere. The thunder stopped mid-roar. The rain cut in half a drop. Wind ceased completely. Silence fell blunt, physical, crushing. I staggered breathless into still air, body swaying under sudden absence of weight. Asphalt shimmered, but not one drop fell. Clothes soaked, hair dripping, lungs filled finally with clean gasps not warped into resonance. I dropped microphones onto ground. They clattered dull, lifeless. For minutes, I could do nothing but sit collapsed in puddle shapes that no longer refilled. My body still vibrated across ribs, like echo left permanent, resonance refusing to fade with storm. Tears leaked uncontrolled, mixing with wet but now alone. The recorder machine lay wrecked beside me, reels bent, magnetic tape rivers unmoving. I pressed it back on, uncertain whether death complete. The reels ticked weak once, then stopped. But inside headphone hiss, one trace lived. No chorus. No chant, only breathing. Mine, yet layered. One inhale, then second half-second late, then whispered third fainter. 3 breath sequences at once pouring from system. One chest alive but playback carrying multiple stacked. I gripped headphones so tight edges cracked plastic. My spine shook with new cold, far worse than rain had ever delivered. Proof clear. I now existed doubled inside itself. Replicas not memory, but lived traces folded in circuits. Morning broke behind shredded clouds. Tower lights glowed weak in pale sky. I sat alive, soaked, shaking, but altered. Every breath after carried suspicion of echoes waiting inside it. I couldn't tell if lungs fully my own or already parallel to spools strewn across pavement. Machine broken, yet recording did not end. The air itself hummed like reels might begin again whenever silence desired. I pressed hand to chest, listened to stacked rhythm inside, and whispered hoarsely into dawn. I was more than one. I returned to the murals because I thought they might comfort me, the way they had once been only odd and unsettling. I wanted to see that they were just paint, just concrete wall and air vents above. Ordinary things. But the moment I stepped into the terminal, I knew they were no longer what they had been. The colors struck sharper, edges bending toward ceiling shadows. Figures now aimed upward, not outward, and segments of paint curled as though wet, shimmering with fresh symbols I swear had never existed. Every detail leaned toward infinite hallway, sky without horizon. I staggered closer, eyes burning under fluorescence. The shapes were recording me seeing them. The tapes in my bag crackled faint, alive despite machines dead. At first they waited to hiss during rainfall, but now they bent differently. They vibrated only when I moved. Every shift of my shoe along terrazzo floor sparked static, low but sharp, like each step invited duplicate to appear one beat behind. By the time I reached mural base, my own motions trailed clear echo that belonged not to acoustics, but mapping. Presence laid one half step after to prove I had already been there. I whispered lines into battered microphone, though barely loud enough for me to hear. No longer weather-bound. They mark me where I walk. I tried sitting quietly on the terminal bench, freezing body into stillness, hoping static would curl back into blank. Instead, silence flooded so complete I shook against it. Then the moment I exhaled, tapes picked up broad crackle, matching breath. Each inhalation, each pause, marked by static copying. I turned head and crowd roared faint, as if tape channel offset seconds behind. People hurried as normal business travelers clutching briefcases, families herding into lines, but I heard them folded into reels in my lap. Their words, their sighs, their impatience. Entire scene duplicated from older logs I had carried home in stacks. Two men near the gate argued about ticket delays. Exact lines I had transcribed 3 weeks ago after another storm. I rifled notebook with trembling hands, flipping back. Pages circled, scrawled margins, exactly the same cadence, pauses intact. Déjà vu reduced, not half memory but whole repetition. They were not living fresh, they were enacting archive. I covered face with palms, yet still their voices played inside my skull, pitched like cassette wine. A woman whispered to her child. Same as tape. I mouthed words a millisecond before they fell from her lips. I was following script I never wrote. I rose unsteady, feet dragging toward window where planes blurred in rain beyond glass. Yet even departure seemed looped. A jet pulled from gate 3. Screens of turbines mirrored exactly file marked last month. Outside timeline had ended. Now only reels repeating until none remembered origin. My bag twitched with tape shifting weak, like animals still breathing. Static drawn not from clouds, but from marrow of those walking. I stood there too long, passengers brushing close, my name echoing faint along hiss just beyond threshold. I sat finally, back at gate B where nights earlier I waited pretending stranded. The plastic seat had warped crack now, yet it felt identical to first shift. Travelers passed carrying same lines. Children repeated questions I knew. Each delay identical. I pressed mic close, throat dry, narrated softer than thinking. I don't know if this is last. Might not be ending. The words felt half assigned already. Not choice but continuation they pressed into me. My hand burned under strap, knuckles trembling as reels shuffled faint. I glanced at mural once again across terminal. Shapes leaned further. Figures twisting toward open sky painted endless like reel that never cut. The storm beyond glass hammered again, though forecast said sun. Sheet by sheet, waters pounded ceiling steel. People flooded walkways without fear, their words sinking to loops I already held. None knew, nobody remembered fresh day. Only me scribbling margins. But even my pen now marked circles repeating. Names layering, digits looping. First time I didn't correct. Page after page filled itself without thought. Every step of mine echoed back one late, shadow script, verifying presence in duplicate. I realized with horror and awe that I was no longer separate from machine. My life unspooled like every reel and bag. I tightened grip around microphone. Voice cracked beyond exhaustion. Still I breathed into it. I think this is last entry, but not finish. Not exit, merging. The sound repeated instantly. Tapes carrying ahead before words left fully. I swallowed, tried again slower. The airport is no hub. It is chamber. The static surged with me, bending chest, pressing ribs outward. My tongue thick with fear and acceptance. It preserves us. My face burned wet without knowing whether rain dripped from ceiling or tears pooled from exhausted ducts. The floor echoed footsteps, delayed half-step behind every move. Lamps above pulsed at same rhythm. Beyond window, sky kept falling water without end, no sun required. Somewhere far beneath, domes thrummed. Pedals stretched underground, antenna mouth wide. All of us spilling forward into long tape-cutting none. I narrated because no silence seemed allowed anymore. Every line feathered into storm. Every pause timed as cue for rain to puncture roof plates with thunderfall. I sat still as hundreds rushed. Their silhouettes blurred sync with logs. Nothing new change. Everything looped. I leaned head against cold window glass and whispered one last coil of proof. Storm waits, patient, always recording. My reflection cracked down pain, doubled. I watched two mouths speak lines in sync, one exact, one slightly ahead. It was only then I understood tape not behind or forward, but forever. Rolling continuum swallowing origin. Not their voices. Not my mine. All of us carried equal in storm machine, humming beneath foundations. And it would wait forever. Until even silence filled reels with replication of what we once thought original life. I closed my eyes and static became breath, my body already stretched across ribbon without end.